challenge ourselves to think bigger.
On va vous inviter à partager vos pensées.
Je vais aller du côté de l'opposition maintenant.
Mesdames et messieurs, je crois que j'ai tout dit ce que j'avais à dire.
Truly is my honor to be here.
Thank you. Good morning. As I was listening to the very excellent first panel, I thought, here we have an academic, a bureaucrat, and a union guy talking about rebooting the economy. And maybe instead of talking about natural resources, I should give an industrialist perspective about rebooting the economy, because last time I looked, a lot of what needs to happen comes from people who are actually in business. So I've got to leave my natural resource stuff to the end of my remarks, and I just want to talk a bit about the government's role in the economy and what can the government usefully do. I was at a round table in London last week where there were 25 CEOs from Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, China, Japan, all across Europe and North America. And they were talking about the future of the forest industry. We were going to talk about climate change, but mostly we ended up talking about the government's role in the economy. And whether you lived in Europe, South America, United States, or Japan, the topic was, hey, over a period of what seems like overnight, we've gone from believing in the market economy to believing in a political economy. To what extent is this real? Well, first of all, there's the trillions of dollars being invested all across the globe by governments in business, in the economy. Then there's everything that's happening on managing energy, carbon, and climate, which is one of the principal feedstocks of all industry. And then there's everything that's happening across the globe in trying to rebuild the financial institutions' capacity, which is the other essential feedstock of business. If you have the embers of an economy and you want to rekindle it, I know reboot is more modern, but rekindle your economy, the breath is going to be financing, and the fuel is going to be literally energy and carbon. And with governments controlling both of these essential rekindling stimuli and investing heavily in all the economies, all of a sudden we find ourselves asking as industrialists, are the conditions of success going to be entrepreneurial excellence or government excellence? And in fact, we are now seeing a shift from competition between enterprises to competition between economies based not just upon the intelligence of the businesses in the economy, but on the strategic capacity of governments. If your government invests smart and strategically, your chances of succeeding in creating and keeping jobs is much larger than if your government invests stupidly. And so these CEOs were basically comparing notes and worrying and saying, all of a sudden, a huge amount of our success factor is out of our control. And we started asking, well, this is just, a thing. They're going to do it all, and then they'll back off. But, of course, backing off is really hard to do. I don't know, I shouldn't really sing this, but, Keynesian economics is fun to do. Now we know that's true. And some think it's going to soon end. But if you're in government, backing off is very hard to do. And so we are facing a prolonged period in which the intelligence of government intervention will be a primary determinant of the success of economies. And the old debate, which we heard a bit of, between lots of government, little bit of government, is probably a lot less important than the new debate between strategic government and less strategic government. Now, I'd like to say in Canada we're well positioned. But you've got to ask, what has our history been in industrial strategy? And basically, what we have called industrial strategy has mostly been social strategy in fancy dress. If you've got a region of the economy, region of the country, or a part of the economy that's not working, we tend to invest heavily and call it an industrial strategy, getting it working. The concept that you would have in a government economic policy that's designed to make money, create jobs, improve well-being for Canadians is relatively unknown in Canada. Our political culture is about how to spend money. Should it be the provinces or the feds or the municipalities? Should it be on healthcare or education? Should it be on regional development, or should it be on city infrastructure? We have huge capacity to debate how and where to spend and who should have the authority to spend. But the idea of the government's role in stimulating making money is we're relatively new at it and relatively innocent at it. And at a time in which industrial intervention is understandably massive, you would hope that industrial strategy was informing what we do. If the government's going to play, it should at least have a point of view, a strategy, and a belief, a self-confidence that what it's playing for is creating an industrial capacity that can actually work. So let me review for just a few minutes what government's role can be. And I want to start near the end of Rob's list. Rob Wright said, you know, when we're through with all this recession stuff, we actually have to have a good, solid economy. And what I would say is our obsession with trying to end the recession is like skating really hard and fast to where the puck was 6 months ago. And where the puck is going to be 3 months from now is on being competitive. That the single most important thing is to keep an eye on, are we going to be able to compete when world markets rebound? And the world is not sitting still. Every country is thinking about, how do I position ourselves? Every industry is going to come out of this recession leaner and changed. And yes, the world economy will reboot, but it won't be the same playing field it was before. It's going to be leaner, meaner, and more competitive. So one, governments should look to where the puck's going to be. Two, governments should make sure they're not stopping change. The political pressure is basically to freeze the status quo. The population says, save our jobs. We need change. Unless you have change both in the economic infrastructure and renewal of individual businesses, we're not going to be ready. And sometimes it's like a forest. If none of the old trees die and leave, the new ones don't grow. And if government policy freezes businesses in place, that means that the new businesses that can grow, be more competitive, more innovative, have no room to come in. So one, look out. Two, don't freeze the status quo. Three, provide a safety net. Four, stimulate. But here what is most important, because the stimulus almost inevitably will come just as it is least needed, as the economy is coming back, not through lack of good faith, intelligence, or hard work, but simply because you just can't spend fast. So if we're going to stimulate, let's do it on things which improve our competitiveness, infrastructure, anything, training, anything which prepares us for tomorrow's economy, rather than just spending to get money out the door. 5, recognize that the playing field is different and respond to threats. And I think the Harper government would say that's exactly what it's doing with the auto sectors. It's a reluctant player in this game, but if it doesn't respond to Obama's move, it means that we basically get wiped out. The same is happening in forestry. The U.S. has put a subsidy on the production of pulp and paper that's equivalent to approximately 2/3 the price of production. It's called the black liquor subsidy. If we don't respond, we die. We cannot produce when somebody else is getting that. It's going to be short-lived in the States. It should be short-lived here. But when competitors try and subsidize their way into winning, we have to match one for one. Otherwise, we just can't stay on the playing field. Now, how it's done is another question. So the way the U.S. has done their pulp and paper subsidy, we think is anti-competitive and anti-environmental, and we'd like to see the government respond with something which is actually more strategic, more long-term pro-competitive, and more long-term environmental. But respond we must. So look out, don't stop change, provide a safety net, stimulate the economy, respond to threats. And then 6, improve business conditions. Improve the tax structure, make the regulatory structure more efficient, deal with, support the retooling of industry so it's more efficient in greening, reform our transportation system, deal with the rail monopolies. The competition in the future is going to be partly about which nations have moved fastest and most effectively in improving hosting conditions. And what's going to be most scarce in the recovery? Capital. Because that's what's broken. It's the capital infusion machine that's broken. It's the financing machine that's broken. So we should look at our tax policies specifically for what will best attract early investments in Canada. And I would remind the government that accelerated capital depreciation is the single most effective instrument they have for this, simply because it rewards exactly the behavior you want, which is investment in Canadian mills. And at a time in which people are going to have very little capital, and in which capital is the most mobile thing on the planet, looking in detail at every bit of our tax structure, how to get the early investments into Canada's businesses will be the single biggest thing the government can do. And then finally, the government's role is to have a point of view. And this is the big shift from old think. Old think was get the macroeconomics right, well, try hard, and get out of the way. That only works if you get out of the way. Government has never gotten out of the way. Microeconomic policy has always micromanaged us. Look at my industry. Trees owned by the government. Energy highly regulated by the government. Transportation highly regulated by the government. Access to the U.S. market pretty well controlled by the government. Let me go on. So the get out of the way thing has always been a myth. And we've always said if you're going to be an active player, at least be a sentient strategic player. But now with massive investment, with government becoming a major player in industrial futures, shouldn't be scared to have a view, because it's really hard to be smart if you haven't got an idea what you're trying to do other than to simply stimulate. All right, now I'm going to go to what I was going to say, and I still have a bit of time, which is on the natural resources. You know, we used to talk about the old economy and the new economy, but that's kind of old. So I'm going to talk about the really old economists, and the new economists. Let's go to the really old economists. Used to think that a nation's wealth is its natural resources. Dig it up, sell it. I think Jim Stanford spent some time sneering at that. And then you come to the old economics, which still predominates in most of Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal. And that is this slightly delusional idea that the way to get rich is to be smarter than everybody else. That if you've got more PhDs, more engineers, better funded research, you can innovate your way into beating the Chinese and the Indians. Simply wrong. China and India produce 500,000 engineers and scientists every year. They're just as smart as us, they work harder, and they're hungry for success. So if we think that our natural advantage is somehow or other that we're going to innovate our way into working at 3, 4, 10 times the wage rate they do and maintain our competitiveness, this is egoistic delusion. And it's old economics. It's based upon the concept that only we can be innovative. What's happened to the concept of an innovative product? It used to be if you had a really bright idea, you could live on it a long time. Today, the difference between a high-end, high-tech innovative idea and a lumpen commodity is 6 months. Now, if somebody in China can reverse engineer right away, it's 3 months. If it's really complicated, it's 8 months. But it doesn't matter what computer, what fancy chip, what systems innovation you do, it's infinitely replicable if you got brains, PhDs, and know-how, and that is not